We ready? Let's do this. Welcome to episode 17 of Things Hidden. Things Hidden is an exploration of the intersection of faith and 6 factors that surround faith: religion, physics, evolution, consciousness, and technological innovation. The purpose of Things Hidden is to bring people into a closer relationship with God, and through that process, coming into a closer relationship with God myself. Okay, here we are, episode 17. Today, we will be reviewing a discussion between Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Alex O'Connor. I will say just 2 things right up front here. First off, if you are a skeptic, if you're an atheist, an agnostic, this discussion is for you. Seriously. The topics covered here today, they will be the most thought-provoking for a skeptic. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that this hour-long discussion it's just jam-packed full of gems. And if you've been following along with Things Hidden, you will hear quite a few concepts and tidbits that will sound familiar to you because this video has just been that impactful for me. At this point, I've listened to the thing half a dozen times, and it really is the kind of discussion that you will never get all of it the first time through. It is just very, very rich content in the best possible way. If you've never heard of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she has a stunning story. Ayaan is a Somali-born Dutch-American activist, author, and former politician. She is currently a fellow at the Hoover Institute. And Ayaan is known for her advocacy for women's rights and her critique of fundamentalist Islam. Ayaan was born into fundamentalist Islam in Somalia. She experienced female genital mutilation at the age of 5, as do nearly all Somalian girls. And her family fled Somalia when she was 6, and she spent the next years in Saudi Arabia and in Ethiopia and in Kenya. And at the age of 22, she was put into an arranged marriage and was being flown to Canada for that arranged marriage. And she fled to the Netherlands, claimed asylum as a refugee in Netherlands. And then while she was in Netherlands, she studied political science, eventually earning a master's degree there. And then shortly thereafter, Ayaan was elected to and served for 3 years as a member of the Dutch House of Representatives. In 2002, in significant part as a response to 9/11, Ayaan publicly renounced her Islamic faith and became an ardent, outspoken atheist. You have perhaps heard of the 4 horsemen of new atheism: Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. Ayaan was actually supposed to be the 4th person in that original roundtable discussion that got the name the 4 Horsemen of New Atheism, but she was unable to make it. And then she was replaced by Dennett in that discussion. And so that just kind of gives you a sense of sort of how big she was and is as a public thinker, and how impactful she was in terms of sharing her atheist beliefs. Now, in November of 2023, Ayaan wrote an essay for Unheard, which I will link to in the description below. The title of this essay was "Why I Am Now a Christian." And this essay caused a tidal wave of reactions from both skeptics and believers alike. And at this point, it's been read hundreds of thousands of times. And then since then, Ayaan's public presence has been as someone that was raised in fundamentalist Islam and then deconstructed to atheism, and then converted to Christianity. And in this video was recorded November 5th of 2024, so a little over a year ago. And it was recorded about a year after she wrote the article. So that gives you just context on the timing of this. And in this video, she is being interviewed by Alex O'Connor for his popular podcast, Within Reason. And Alex is one of the leading online voices in philosophy today. I have listened to many hours of Alex, both as a host and as a guest of other podcasts. And he is just excellent in both of those roles. I find Alex to be an incredibly impressive guy, not least because he's only 26 years old. Alex is a skeptic. He identifies as an atheist agnostic, which he describes as leaving room for transcendent possibilities without a firm belief in God. So that's Alex's stance on this sort of stuff. And very often, I have found Alex's questions and comments to be illuminating for my own faith. He asks questions and frames concepts in ways that really have helped me think hard about what exactly it is that I believe and why I believe it. And he knows more about the Bible than most Christians, and he is not dismissive of faith, which this can be hard to find sometimes in atheists. And Alex has stated multiple times, he says it in this video today, that he really wishes he could be a Christian. He wishes that he believed it, but alas, he does not believe. He cannot force himself to believe. And so he remains a skeptic. But he is a curious and a knowledgeable skeptic that I have found to consistently act in good faith, for lack of a better term. And I just really appreciate that about Alex. So without further ado, this is Alex O'Connor interviewing Ayaan Hirsi Ali about her conversion to Christianity.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali, welcome to the show.
Alex, thank you very much for having me.
It's been an incredible year for you, coming out as a Christian, dealing with the reactions and criticisms as a result of that. My first question is, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
I hope so. How is your life different from a year ago when you'd become a Christian, but you were getting ready to talk about it? It wasn't part of your public persona yet. How has life changed for you?
Well, I think I was troubled in my heart, in my head, and I'm in a place of peace. I'm at peace with what I do, with where I am, with my work, with my family, and it's something new for me. So sometimes there's this sense that it will just disappear and I'll go back to that time of confusion and trouble, but it's permanent. It feels permanent. It feels more permanent. And in fact, every day I feel more and more attached. I'll say attached and connected to God, and that connection then gives me a much stronger connection with everything else, with my family and friends and relations and my work.
Has the way you feel about Christianity changed since publicizing Christianity that you have? Has that changed the way that you approach it? I imagine that there are a lot of people trying to help you determine which denomination you might be or iron out some of the intricacies of your theology. How has it been since actually coming out, as it were?
Well, I have to always bear in mind, and I think maybe there's an advantage to coming to Christianity as an older person, is that you keep telling yourself there is Christ and his teachings, the gospel and the Bible, and then there are the followers of Christ who are humans. And
always good to keep those two things separated. The people, the followers of Christ, imperfect, will always be imperfect. And it's good to separate those things.
They see things differently and they experience things differently. And so, yes, I do get all these invitations of people saying, join my denomination. It's better than the other one. And here's why it's better than the other one. I also really get a lot of people who say, I prayed for you for so many years, and my prayers have been answered. And of course, my answer is always Amen. But aside from that, I also get a large number of people who are delighted that people like me, who are former atheists and vocal former atheists, are coming back and saying there's something of value to religion in general and Christianity in particular. So I get that reaction as well.
And how do you feel about the fact that a lot of people are using your conversion to put a flag in a cultural moment? I mean, such a personal story as yours, which perhaps we can relay to those who don't know, becoming a political tool for so many to say, look at what's happening in the world, look at this former atheist, look at how she's become a Christian, and putting you up on something of a pedestal. How has that been for you?
So I don't like pedestals because I don't think that it's a good way of doing things. Again, my attraction to Christianity is really more of the humility and the meekness and the fact that you're fallible over and over again. You sin, you admit that you're a sinner. And so by so doing, you don't, you try your best not to judge others. But then in terms of people using me, I don't feel used, but I do sense an excitement when it comes to a rekindling of religion, not so much as politics, but the religious foundations of Western society, of America, of course, and then Britain, and in the other places where Christianity was put down, was ridiculed, was likened to Islam and other religions, was called irrational. People who are Christians mocked and called stupid and irrational. And so I find that there's this excitement if someone like me can come back to Christianity and appreciate what it is, aside from even believing in God, just appreciating the outcome of this culture, I think is a big step. And so I don't see it as a political, it may have something political, but it is first and foremost, it's a cultural awakening or reawakening, or maybe a cultural confidence that needs to come back.
How much of your experience in the last few years of coming to Christianity has been a result of cultural considerations, and how much a result of personal considerations, or perhaps even theological considerations? Perhaps you can walk us through what it is that brought you to Christ.
It's personal, completely personal. I was in a place of complete darkness and crisis. I was terrified. I was confused. I was in this depression. I just felt this emptiness and darkness. And I resisted all invitations to spirituality because I thought that's not me.
So the backstory there is that Ayaan experienced massive childhood trauma, massive religious trauma, female genital mutilation. This is primarily an Islamic practice focused in Somalia and Ethiopia and Mali, where the very large majority of girls have this happen to them. And Ayaan experienced this mutilation and other abhorrent actions as part of her fundamentalist Islam upbringing. And so she's carrying that with her, around with her as an adult. She has this very significant childhood trauma, religious trauma, and she's spent many years with many therapists trying to work through this trauma, through this PTSD, and to get her mental health into a better place. And at one point along that journey, one of her therapists told her that her mental health issues, they may stem from a spiritual bankruptcy. At this point, she is, an ardent, outspoken atheist, one of the most well-known public atheist voices in the world. And a therapist tells her that, which is like a pretty interesting thing to hear from a therapist. But as it turns out, that ends up being this turning point in her story of her conversion to Christianity.
Islam, my associations with the concept of God was a God of punishment and a God of anger and a God in whose name so many terrible things were said and done over centuries. So I wasn't up for that.
A God of punishment, a God of anger, a God in whose name so many terrible things have been said and done over the centuries. And you may be sitting here right now listening to this, and you may feel the same way about this. You may feel the same way about God. Ayaan is worth listening to on this topic. This is a woman that has experienced a degree of religious trauma that very few have. And so she just provides this, this really unique vantage point on this.
But I realized that as human beings, we are more than just reason, and that there's more than the material and the rational, and that it's not either or. It's not that you either choose reason or faith. I think you can have both of them if you understand to keep them separate. So it was 100% personal. But then, of course, I don't live in a vacuum. I look around me and I saw similar in many ways. I know my story is unique, but in many ways, it's not that unique. There's a great deal of, I'll say, disconnection in our society. And people have left whatever it is that rooted them in their society and in their families and in their communities. And for many in the West, that was Christianity. And so I've come to see that it's not just the personal, but on a community level, even on a civilizational level, the throwing away of Christianity was, I think, what was the saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so you can be like Richard Dawkins, an avowed atheist, and still appreciate the legacy of Christianity and the roots of this culture in Christianity.
As Richard Dawkins does, I just joined him in Oxford to as part of his tour for a show. And when I saw him, I told him that I'd been to Evensong the night before. And I said it almost a little bit embarrassed, as if to say, you know, to the world's most famous atheist, I quite like the choir. I went to Evensong last night, and you know what he said? Me too. I just went to a different one at a different college.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's just a funny aside. Evensong, this is a nighttime Anglican worship service that happens weekly or even more frequently in the UK. And Richard Dawkins, the most famous atheist alive today, and Alex O'Connor, perhaps the most famous Gen Z skeptic alive today, are both going to church. They're both going to this worship service because they like the vibe. And that's just funny in a thought-provoking sort of way.
When you came out as a Christian in Unheard, the principal reaction that I saw from people is that here is an essay that talks about Trump, it talks about Putin, it talks about China, it talks about politics, and mentions the name of Jesus, I think, precisely once, mentions Richard Dawkins, mentions cultural factors. And a lot of people read this essay, Why I Am Now a Christian, and heard essentially a political treatise and thought, is Ayaan a Christian for essentially political reasons, disconnected from the truth of the Christian doctrine? Since then, it sounds like your story has been much more personal, but people might still ask the same question. How much of this has to do with you believing that the doctrines of Christianity are true? That's also one of Richard's biggest problems or critiques, is that we're all delighted to see that this has changed your life and transformed you and that you're happy again. Yeah. I mean, nobody can disagree about that. But people will raise this question mark. Do you believe that it's true? Does that even matter to you?
I believe that it's true, and it matters very much. And I think also I got a deluge of emails and papers all asking the same question, to what degree is this personal? Is the political masquerading as personal, in addition to the people who are saying, I prayed for you or come to my denomination. No, I believe it. What I will not do, which is, I think, hard for people like Richard, is take my 21st century brain and explain first century events.
What I will not do, which I think is difficult for people like Richard Dawkins, is to take my 21st century brain and explain first century events. I think that's just a really nice one-liner to just keep in your head as we sit here today in 2026, looking back on and trying to, analyze and figure out the historicity of the stories that are in the Bible, that are in the Gospels. And there is a gap there that we will never be able to fully bridge. We can certainly spend time on it. It's a thing worth spending time on and discussing and, chewing on. But there will always be that gap. And you cannot take the scientific method, this 21st century brain, you cannot take the scientific method and apply that to the historicity of first century events. And that's why she uses this phrase, I choose to believe. And that's a great way to think about it.
But I'm reading a lot. Reading the Gospels, I'm reading Old Testament, New Testament, I'm reading the apologetics. And a world is opening up for me that in many ways I find so fascinating and enriching. And I will not tell you that I can explain the miracles that took place in the first century. I can't explain them, but I do choose to believe in them. And that's a completely different attitude. And having that faith, faith, as you know, you have faith. I think where it's important to separate reason from faith is I'm not going to prove it, and you don't need proof, you believe. And so having embarked on that path, I find what I read strengthens that faith more and more each day. And it's a pity, and this is sort of a statement to my fellow atheists, to lead a life of constantly fortifying yourself against faith. And then in that way, you create a counter-faith in non-faith. And you don't allow even a tiny opening because you're creating these barriers around, you don't allow any. We used to say, one thing I liked about the Enlightenment, and I still do, is don't prejudge. Come, to the table with no preconceived notions about what you're going to hear or see. And that's not what my fellow atheists were doing. They were just really fortifying themselves against ever believing. And they had very solid preconceived notions. And then that in itself became a gospel of its own. And so there is the new atheism. This is what we believe in versus the people who believe in God. And then again, it has a bit of a tribal element to it, where this is, that's you and that's me.
People listening will think, well, no, atheism is just a disbelief in God. Here's a worldview that's being presented to me and I'm saying I don't believe it. What is, in your view, has formerly one of the most important figures in the new atheist movement, what can you now see as the gospel of new atheism? What is that? What is new atheism's 10 commandments? What does it look like as a worldview?
I think that...
Yeah, so formerly one of the most important figures in the new atheist movement. So that just helps contextualize the stature of Ayaan as a public thinker, specifically within atheism.
What
is new atheism's 10 commandments? What does it look like as a worldview?
I think the reason why it was called new atheism was that it had this, this evangelizing aspect to it. Because yes, you're right, atheism, or to be an atheist is simply to take on the attitude of say, I don't think there's any proof. Convince me. If I see evidence of the existence of God, I might change my mind. So that attitude hardened into something along the lines of, there is no proof, there is no evidence, therefore I don't believe in God. And not only that, people who believe in God are wicked, they're dangerous, they're stupid, they're superstitious, and therefore we must evangelize against them. And I think in hindsight, I'm speaking for myself, that was a very unhealthy attitude to take because you close off so much.
Yeah, pretty massive there. What she's pointing out, which I think many have come to realize, is that new atheism became evangelical and dogmatic in its beliefs in the exact same way that new atheism fights so strongly against with regards to Christianity. New atheism became evangelical about their dogma, while at the same time trying to condemn Christians who were taking the same approach to their faith. And that just very obviously does not hold up to logical scrutiny. Anyone that spends time observing this and thinking about this realizes that there is just a big logic hole that shows up there in new atheism. And when I think about the decline in the popularity and the significance and the social sway that new atheism has had over the last few years, I think a big reason for that is that people identified this exact thing that we're talking about here. They identified that this is a movement that has now become evangelical about their dogma of disbelief. That didn't work very well.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that new atheism made?
For me, it's the statement that all religions are the same. They are not. I grew up as a Muslim. I'm a Christian now. They're completely different. So it was a huge mistake to throw them all in one bucket and make this general statement about all religions being the same. Number one.
Yeah, okay. So you just have to contextualize the gravity of what it was that she just said there. This is somebody with a profoundly first-person experience with Islam. And this is a person with a profoundly first-person experience with atheism. And she is saying that the number one mistake that new atheists made was thinking that Islam and Christianity are the same. They're not the same.
Make this general statement about all religions being the same. Number one. Number two, I think that because of this attitude, religion is, it's superstition, it's untrue, it's unintelligent. I think a false dichotomy was created about, you can either have faith, you can be religious, or you can be a man of reason, but you can't be both. And that.
So that one obviously hits extremely close to home for me. You can either have faith, you can be religious, or you can be a man of reason, but you can't be both. I mean, that just hits at the core of what Things Hidden is. It is removing that false dichotomy. You can be a person of faith while also having a logical, rational, analytical, general approach. Now, there's still this component of choosing to believe, and you can't ram 21st century, ways of thinking into explaining first century events like we just talked about. But you can do both at the same time, and thinking that you cannot, Ayaan is identifying as the second big mistake of the new atheism movement.
I think then created even more confusion, especially for young people looking for role models, looking to answer the question, what's the purpose and meaning of life? Why are we here? How do I relate to my fellow human beings? What's the good life? So those are two major ones. And then three, I think the organizing and then trying to mobilize people to choose atheism with both of these points, that I think then all it did was weaken and degenerate belief in Christianity, and it strengthened other religions. It strengthened Islam because it's consistent with what, for instance, members of the Muslim Brotherhood say about Christianity. They say it's false, it's weak, Muhammad is the last word. And so you listen to the atheists and they say they are saying it themselves. And it also opened, I think, the door for other pseudo-religions. Many of us have been discussing what wokeism is. And in many ways, it has, I know it is neo-Marxism or it's cultural Marxism, as some call it, but it is with religious zeal that some people believe in it and don't question it. And there is this void, this spiritual need that people have. And they found it in wokeism because wokeism insists on justice and young people seeking to do what is right and what's good and what's just now find it in these either false gods or are in fact converting to Islam or are feeling quite frustrated with their own legacy. They've been told Christianity is synonymous with, it's the religion of the white man. And the white man, the white heterosexual man, is an exploiter, a slaveholder, a colonizer, is awful. And so you can't be Christian, you have to be something else. And I think that in itself has created a lot of, and I think it's unintended, but anxieties, depressions, confusion. And so these are all things that we have to grapple with.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to play the last minute there. We're just going to listen to that one more time because I really think that it's that powerful.
And it also opened, I think, the door for other pseudo-religions. Many of us have been discussing what wokeism is. And in many ways, it has, I know it is neo-Marxism or it's cultural Marxism, as some call it, but it is with religious zeal that some people believe in it and don't question it. And there is this void, this spiritual need that people have. And they found it in wokeism because wokeism insists on justice and young people seeking to do what is right and what's good and what's just now find it in these either false gods or are in fact converting to Islam or are feeling quite frustrated with their own legacy. They've been told Christianity is synonymous with, it's the religion of the white man. And the white man, the white heterosexual man, is an exploiter, a slaveholder, a colonizer, is awful. And so you can't be Christian, you have to be something else. And I think that in itself has created a lot of, and I think it's unintended, but anxieties, depressions, confusion. And so these are all things that we have to grapple with.
There will have been a time when you believed that religion was not just wrong, but evil, a bad force for the world, wrapped up in this new atheist movement. You've had a personal change in conviction. You've had something speak to you and quite clearly transform you as a person. You said that you've been reading the Gospels, reading the Old Testament. When you come across these verses that you yourself probably would have once cited as problems with the Christian religion, when you read these difficult passages in the Old Testament that seem to be condoning all kinds of things, slavery and genocide, when you look in the New Testament at Paul's assessment of the position of women, the kind of thing that an atheist looks at and says, this is why Christianity, whether it's true or false, is definitely evil. Outside of the sort of effect of the Christian religion, in other words, the doctrine itself, when you come across these verses, how does Christian Ayaan deal with that and react to that differently to how atheist Ayaan would have done?
So atheist Ayaan would have come with that fortified, closed mind of what I'm reading is just an old text written by people who are afraid of the world and afraid of the dark and, all the other stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And then new Ayaan, having now really seen the key differences between different religions, is now curious. I come to it with great curiosity with, yes, so if these things are in the Old Testament, then what? And then what you see is this evolution. not just in the text itself, but also the adherence to the text. You see, and I find them quite fascinating, the enormous fights that people had within churches, and what is the interpretation of this verse, of that gospel, of this chapter, or what was Jesus trying to say? And the constant battle with the human condition, the recognition that is trying to understand the human condition, maybe what's called a sin in the Bible is what in modern day life we call impulses and urges and character defects, whatever you want to call them. But the product then is an incredible, really wealthy output of wisdom. And again, even if you don't believe in God, or you refuse to believe in God because you can't see it, it would be such a pity not to partake of this wisdom, not to consider it. I'll give you one example. In the years that I was in therapy, I would see, there was all of these rational conclusions to this is how you respond to a certain situation. I was diagnosed with PTSD. Part of it was because Theo van Gogh was mad and my non-response to my trying to shut off that experience, but also a lot of what went on in my childhood and trying to shut that off. And the advice you get through the books and the study based on studies of the human condition, the conclusions they reach and the advice they give now is plainly in the Bible and it's for free. And so there's a great deal of, wow.
What is it that you find in the Bible that you would also find as a result of that kind of therapy?
Okay, so this part coming up right here, just to preface it for a second, for anyone that has ever been in therapy, which I have, just listen carefully to what how she's about to respond to Alex's question in terms of the similarities between the life and the teachings of Jesus Christ and what sort of modern day American secular therapy, tries to get at.
Find in the Bible that you would also find as a result of that kind of therapy?
One thing that therapists insist on when you come from a very damaged background in childhood, like I did, is lack of being loved and the fear of abandonment and rejection. And now reading the message of Jesus, it's this abundant love. God gave you life and he loves you and his life is unconditional. It's an infinite. I think, is it John 12? And when I read that now, part of me thinks again, processing this with a number of other patients or a number of other broken people, I think, you guys, you got this for free. I mean, it's like, it's in your culture. You could have just gone to church. You could have talked to you don't need to be in this, institution to come to this conclusion. Because when I was growing up, my idea of God was not a God who loved you unconditionally and infinitely. It was a God who gave you a little manual of halals and harams. This is what's right and that's what's wrong. And veering away from what's right and doing what's wrong, which is the human condition. Again, your impulses, your urges, you are very rebellious. So you would be punished, and many times over on earth and in the hereafter. And that's only strengthened the feelings of self-hatred and self-loathing and shame and terror. So you live in this constant state of terror. Life becomes unbearable.
A lot there. You guys got this for free. It's in your culture. You could have just gone to a church. That's the Tom Holland approach. And then additionally, a God that gave you a little manual of halals and harams, of rights and wrongs. and a God that punished you for your wrongs many times over on earth and in the hereafter. And that only strengthened the feelings of self-hatred and self-loathing and shame and terror. And you live in this constant state of terror. So she is describing the God that she was brought up with in Islam. And she is making the point that this is not the nature of God. It is a terrible mistake to think that this is the nature of God. It's a mistake that Islam makes, and it's a mistake that atheists make to characterize this good, loving, protective God that wants the best for you. And it is a warping of that to think of God, as this solely wrathful, punishing many times over, and the emotions that come out of that, which Ayaan is only too acutely aware of. It's a really powerful point that she's making.
So there's some of those things, and when I tell you I'm going to try and answer some of these questions in more detail in the book. This is just a small foretaste of it. Is you have inherited a culture and a religious tradition that is much more suited to understanding and to empowering and enriching the human condition with all its frailties, with all its brokenness, than the ones that millions and millions of other people are born into.
Yeah, so that is the Tom Holland approach right there. A culture that is, better suited to help the flourishing of the human condition. Western civilization built on Christianity.
Than the ones that millions and millions of other people are born into. And you can see why, even though on a personal level, yes, I find I'm at peace with it. I'm really, really happy. But then you look up and you look at the world and everything you see around you are all these challenges, and you just want to say, it's really not that difficult. We've made it difficult. And you don't have to choose between faith and reason. You can have both of them. And in fact, I find Christianity a religion of reason, much more about reason than anything else.
I want to ask you about the cultural impact of the Christian worldview, but I do also want to really press this idea that those problems that you identified in the Christian religion will still exist. Richard Dawkins, for example, thinks that the most evil idea of the New Testament is the idea that everyone is born in sin, the idea that there needs to be a human sacrifice in order to atone us when God presumably could have just forgiven us anyway. And he sees this as grotesque. And this isn't the Crusades or the Inquisition. This isn't something that the Christian church has done. This is something that's baked into the Christian religion. And I don't know if you would have said 10 years ago that you also thought that was an evil idea, but that idea is still there, still just as obvious and important as it was 10 years ago. When someone like Richard says, this is evil, this is a bad thing to be teaching children, that they're born in sin and that they cannot be good without the help of a God who threatens them with eternal punishment if they refuse to love him or even just fail to believe in him. What do you make of those criticisms now?
So I'd say some of the complex layers of that I would leave to people who are much more, I'd say, more immersed theologians who can make the point for them. But again...
Yeah, so you might make the argument that she's kind of sidestepping this question that Alex just asked, which is a very good question. And maybe to some degree that might be true. What Alex is describing here, what Richard Dawkins finds so evil, is penal substitution atonement theory. And my guess is that Ayaan does not subscribe to penal substitution atonement theory. And we are in the same boat in that regard, because I also do not subscribe to penal substitution atonement theory. Not all Christians do. And my guess is that when she refers to, when she says, I would defer to the theologians, what she may have in mind is the simple fact that Jesus did not teach penal substitution atonement theory. This was not a teaching of Jesus. And she doesn't want to get into all the details right here on that specific point. And she may not be able to sit there and defend with scriptural references off the top of her head, be able to defend, what Jesus say, what Jesus didn't say, what Paul said, what Paul actually meant in these different things. She may not be able to do that off the top of her head. And I totally get that. But I think that is what is going on here.
Go back to this human condition thing. And we have free will. I know that I'm capable of good. I know that I'm capable of evil and bad stuff. And here is a God, at least in the Christian God, as I see it, who says, you are, free to do as you wish. Here are the laws. Here's what it means to be a good person. And you choose what you want to do about that. And if I make terrible choices, I'm forgiven over and over and over again. And I think that recognition that good and evil are in us and that we have the free will to choose, that's a much more powerful message than if you had human beings who are then, because again, that begs Richard's question, Richard's opposition, then begs the question, are we robots then? I mean, we're now in this era of AI. We could have been designed as just doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And then not being moral beings. And I mean, I think we don't want 7 billion robots. Mm. What would even the point be?
Mm. Yeah, well, people are made very uncomfortable with the idea that we don't have agency, that we're not in control in this way. But that was the big criticism that Christopher Hitchens made in the other direction. He said that God is a celestial dictator. God is somebody who is constantly surveilling you and watching you while you sleep and convicting you of thought crime and punishing you for even disobedience in your own mind. Presumably that's not the relationship you feel that you have with God.
I think he read more of the Quran than the New Testament.
I did wonder, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, if you could sit down with Christopher Hitchens today or go back in time and speak to him, what would you say to him? What do you think?
I think we would tour the universities together.
Woo! Ayaan, we would tour the universities together. Got to respect that. She knows more about these problems in academia, than just about anyone. She is a world-famous Muslim-turned-atheist activist politician. She has been in the belly of the beast in terms of the problems in academia. It's just probably worth listening to.
In America, and we would look at what's happening to young people today. And we would look at the effect of saying what it is that they're seeking and they're opening themselves up to. And here I referenced Bertrand Russell when he wrote the essay, Why I'm Not a Christian, where he then really goes on to say, if Christianity were to disappear, we would have, reason would overtake and we'd be would have so much progress and so much humanity and so much reason. And then now we actually have the empirical reality where Christianity is waning. And what we are getting in the highest temples of learning, the temples of reason, it's unreason. And I would want to...
Woo. Ayaan, another banger. It is not reason, it is unreason. She is talking about Bertrand Russell's famous essay from 1927, Why I Am Not a Christian. And in that essay, Bertrand Russell puts forth that if society just moved off of Christianity, moved off of Christian ideals, which were, completely dominant in 1927, that things would just get a lot better. You would have much more reason and progress and these sorts of things. But we've actually been running that experiment lately. And the thing that cropped up as Christianity and Christian ideals have increasingly gone by the wayside, the thing that popped up was wokeism, and increasingly more radical wokeism. And we just cannot do that. You cannot pick atheistic wokeism as the operating system for your civilization and expect your civilization to flourish. That will not happen. And you can reason about why that will not work from first principles, and then you can see it failing in action. That's what Ayaan is talking about here. And it is a really, really important thing that is worth listening to her on.
A conversation with Christopher Hitchens. And when I brought this up with Richard Dawkins, he did acknowledge it, and he finds it frustrating. And I understand why he's frustrated. But I think we have to go back to this idea of, as human beings, we're much, much more complex than just the material. The atheist assertion, we're insignificant, we are nothing. I forget what Richard used to say about, we're so, he said, I forget the exact quote, but it amounts to...
Blind, pitiless indifference.
Yes, we're no more... What was it? We have no more significance than some kind of organism.
Right.
And that's just not true.
Mm.
And anyway, I also want to point out in this reading journey that I have taken on, that there are more and more people, the more we discover about the universe and the more we discover about the world, there are more and more scientists, especially on the hard science part, who are saying there is something rather than nothing. And I think that's sort of the conversation I would have with Christopher Hitchens. The problem of the activism, the evangelizing of atheism, I think that creates a barrier that robs one of curiosity. If you just shed that and you come, and you shake that off and you think, I'm open to change my mind, then, you could change your mind. You could see things that you wouldn't see when you say, I don't want to see it at all. Mm. In other words, the accusation they level against people of faith is also true for them. They really do believe in being atheists, in not believing in God. Mm. And so that is why the whole conversation about within the Christian West ended with let's agree to disagree, until the world came into the West, until Islam came and other forces came in, and that is why it's reopened.
Mm. Well, the idea is that everybody worships something. Everybody has their dogmas. Everybody has things that they believe essentially without evidence. And the atheist message was always, we're people who analyze these questions. We're people who plug in those gaps in our knowledge. And if we can't justify something, we're not going to believe it. And with that, they levy this closed-minded accusation against the religious. And I guess there's one thing to say that they do it as well. Do you think that they do it more so?
If you read the works of the apologetics, it's really this whole exercise in trying to grapple with that, where they say, we're not believing in something just because we believe in it, and we're sticking to this really very serious attempts at trying to understand, to explain, and there's a great deal of doubt and self-doubt. So I think it is really on the other side where there is this certainty that there is nothing, and then trying to get everyone to come to the belief that there is nothing. And I'm not saying this is true for every atheist.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a caricature to say that Christians they all just believe without evidence and without thinking. It's like, oh, have you read the apologetics? Have you read the gallons of ink spilled over debating and trying to justify positions? Now, of course, atheists will say that, well, we do that too, and we do it better. But you're someone who's been on both sides of that. And I think when atheists say, oh, Christians, they just believe it because their parents told them to, they're thinking of like their uncle at Thanksgiving. Yeah, they're not thinking of the William Lane Craigs or the Alexander Pruses of the world. They're thinking of someone that they know personally. But similarly, I know more atheists who are just atheists because, I've never seen any evidence, whatever, haven't given it much thought.
Yeah.
Then I know atheists who've sort of reasoned their way into that conclusion. I think it happens on both sides, in other words, but you're someone who's now lived both of those sides and interacted with both of those sides. And you said a second ago that you feel like more closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side than the Christian side.
More closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side, and more certainty.
More closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side and more certainty. And you have to listen to someone with her lived experience when she's talking about a subject like this. Ayaan is acutely aware of the two sides. She's experienced the two sides. And so her perspective, I just find it to be extraordinarily valid on this particular thing. And the more closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side.
The Christian side.
More closed-mindedness comes from the atheist side and more certainty. Again, not for every atheist, but definitely if you take atheism and you turn it into an activist position, because then you're selling something. And that's what is, it's blinding, isn't it? You become so confident. And I think even a little more than confidence, there's an element of arrogance in this is it. There's really nothing more to know or learn or find out. We have it. There's nothing.
I mean, people say that that's what the Christians say. They say, I have my answer in this book, and I'm a humble Christian who has the answer to the biggest question of the universe and knows the truth. And there's no need for further inquiry because we have the scripture. It tells us the way things are.
I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure that's the case for a lot of Christians. And I have to tell you, on a personal level, it is wonderful to have the answer, to have this relationship with God, a God who's loving and whom I talk to and pray to and feel a sense of peace. But then on a more intellectual level, when you take the position, there is something. I think you are then much more involved mentally in proving or even finding out. The curiosity is very high. It's finding out, well, if there's something, what is it then? And where can I find it? So I think that opens up just a whole lot more in terms of learning and reading and finding out. And, in the time that I became a Christian, I've also been approached by people saying, hang on, there is something, but it's not necessarily Christianity. It's something else. There's an energy, and people are giving it all sorts of names. Mm-hmm. But that's, I think that stance, that mental stance, it provides for more curiosity than the position where there's nothing, I can't be bothered. Or I can only be bothered to tell other people that there is nothing.
Yeah, so that couple minutes there just resonated very deeply with me. Ayaan is talking about a stance of intellectual and spiritual openness, a willing to be open to the idea that there is something, and that something, what she means is that it seems like this was created. And if this was created, there is a creator. That is the something that she's referring to. And then she's also putting forth a framework that we discussed in episode 2 of Things Hidden, a top-down and a bottoms-up approach to faith. And the top-down is reason and logic and thinking about the universe and cosmology and just arriving at the sense that there is something there from that perspective. But then there is also this bottoms-up approach, and that is the personal relationship that you can have with the divine, the personal encounters that are available to all of us with the divine. And the power in those personal experiences, the love and the peace and the healing and the transformation that comes from those individual encounters with the divine through prayer and contemplation and reading scriptures. And that is just beautifully said.
Be bothered, or I can only be bothered to tell other people that there is nothing.
You said before, I choose to believe. It sounded to me as if you'd been convinced by your personal experience that there's something, and Christianity resonated with you on like a moral level or on an existential level, then faced with this worldview that comes packaged along with it, that there was a man who was born of a virgin and died on a cross and exited a tomb, that you choose to believe that. A lot of people will look at that not so much with criticism, but with astonishment. I mean, my listeners know that I'm somebody who would love to be a Christian. I'd love for it to be true. How do you choose to believe in something?
Well, I think I probably chose with my feet to begin with, because I came for certain things when I came to the West, and I wanted to be seen as a human being. I wanted to make choices. I didn't want to be forced into a marriage that I didn't want to be in. I wanted to tell the truth. I came from an environment ruled by fear and terror. So you lie to survive. You're always dishonest. You're always hiding what you want, what you really want, because you're worried about the punishments. I came, so I wanted to be honest, lead an honest, transparent life, a life of integrity. I wanted to have real, true, fulfilling friendships and relationships. And so as I said, these are my values. And then on a political level, political freedom, which is institutions that seek to ensure that you can have this life of freedom and prosperity and so on. And so honestly, it is, and this is the thing why I said Richard Dawkins is a Christian, he just doesn't know it, is we're all living according to this morality that we inherited from Christianity, Christ's teachings. You know, we would go all over the place telling Muslims, let's separate politics from religion. And, with the stoning and all that, we would say, if you cast the first stone if you have no sin. All of these things. I was living according to these values. All I've done really is find the humility to come and accept the source.
Again, incredibly powerful for a bunch of different reasons. One thing that stands out there to me is humility. A belief in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior is a humble belief. There is a lot of power in that belief in different ways, but all of that power, it stems from humility, from humbleness. A true belief in Jesus as Lord and Savior requires an admission of the inability to do it on your own, and then a deferral to and a reliance on Jesus. So if you see a prideful Christian, an egotistical Christian, they are doing it wrong. It is a good thing to be proud of being a Christian. It is a mistake to be prideful about being a Christian.
Fortunate in doing that, and I'd say my personal suffering has brought me to a place where I've now got this consistency, and I don't live in the dissonance of thinking these are the values that I hold, but Christianity is false. Well, Christianity is just like Islam.
It feels like a different thing. Like there's the moral Christianity, and I'm suspicious of the idea that all of my moral intuitions are a result of Christianity. But suppose that were the case. The reason why I couldn't call myself a Christian is because I don't believe it's true. And to say I choose to believe something, it almost fills me with hope, as if maybe that's something I can do one day. But it's such an extraordinary claim. The physical resurrection of Jesus, or things like the virgin birth that Richard likes to talk about. It's as if you asked me to believe that glass of water on the table was actually made out of spaghetti, just with the appearance of glass. It's this extraordinary claim that I could try to choose to believe it, but if I'm just not convinced, I don't know how I can assent to that proposition, even if it turned out that believing that made my life better and it was more in line with how I was behaving and all of this kind of stuff. I believe that glass is made out of glass and not spaghetti. And if you ask me to just choose to believe a factual statement that I found so extraordinary, it wouldn't just be that I didn't want to, it'd be that I couldn't. So there's that moral element, which maybe everybody's already living by, and they're already basically nominal Christians in that respect. But when it comes to the truth claims, is that something that you can just choose to think is true?
Well, of course, I prayed, and like I said, in praying, I felt a change. I felt an energy. I felt a sense of calm and peace. And I didn't leave it at praying. I pray, and again, I feel these changes. I wish I could share them with you. But then,
I'm just going to replay those last 20 seconds again. It's that powerful.
In praying, I felt a change. I felt an energy. I felt a sense of calm and peace. And I didn't leave it at praying. I pray. And again, I feel these changes. I wish I could share them with you. But then I also went on to read. And when I read the Gospels, I know I can't, the stories that are told, again, these are first century accounts of things that were happening, and I'm using my 21st century brain to digest it and to understand it. But if we say miracles are really extraordinary things, because if they happen all the time, they wouldn't be miracles, then I choose to believe, and I choose with the force that I feel, the calm, the peace, the stories. I see a great deal of consistency. And then on top of that, it's watching, and for me, this is an empirical testament, is the communities, the societies that build their lives on that faith and live by those laws tend to be happier, more prosperous, more connected. And look, I've only been a Christian for 2 years, less than 2 years. So,
but to clear up for those who are familiar with your piece on Unheard and hear your personal story, you do believe in those truth claims, in the resurrection of Jesus.
I totally choose to believe in the resurrection, And also the story itself and what it tells us. A God who died for our sins so that we are forgiven, so that we can live. And I think it's extraordinary. It's such a beautiful and amazing story. I've got the chills talking about it. And so I think our human mind is more than just, show me the hard physical proof, and if I don't see that, it's not there. It's like the way you would appreciate poetry or great works of art, great music. You feel something, you feel something really strong. It's there. You just can't quantify it, and you can't show any material evidence for it, but it's there. And so for me, these first century accounts are, they're true. I wasn't there to witness it myself. This great insight into the human condition. That leaps out at me because, of course, I got my introduction into psychology. I had my sister when I was 26, 27 years old. My sister had some psychotic episodes. She was only 1.5 years younger than me. And I plunged into reading works of psychiatry that were produced, the DSM books. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, what a discovery that was, because I had never viewed madness, is what I call it in Somali. It's just you don't have many different words for it. You have colloquial words like crazy, mad. You don't call it psychiatric conditions. You don't have a word for psychosis. You don't have a word for the different types of psychotic episodes that one can have. So I dived into those books, and now diving into the Bible, into the Gospels, and into the commentary, what jumps out at me is that this stuff was known 2,000 years ago, and it evolved, and we continue to evolve, and we continue to build on that. And so that makes it, for me, feel even more true than having to witness the miracle itself.
Again, find that to be a very powerful perspective. The way that I take what she's saying there is Ayaan has seen up close and personal the way modern culture treats, psychotic episodes or mental health issues, oftentimes stemming from trauma. And in the Gospels, she sees these stories that echo these sorts of psychotic episodes. And in the Gospels, we see that Jesus can cure that. And what I think Ayaan is saying is that still happens today. There are people with serious mental health issues, oftentimes stemming from trauma, that reach out to Jesus today, and they get better. They get much better. Jesus today cures people of the types of mental health issues that the Gospels tell stories about. And you don't have to know for sure what it was that Jesus was doing back in the first century in the Gospel stories, because you can see what he continues to do today in that regard. It's very powerful.
We're filming this on the day of the presidential election in America.
Yeah.
Okay, so just as a quick preface, the next 10 minutes or so, the discussion veers towards politics. And just as a reminder, like you just said, they're filming this on November 5th, 2024, the day of the presidential election. The outcome of that election is not known when they recorded this. And Ayaan, she is a dual American-Dutch citizen. And she just has some really interesting takes on the political landscape in America and on Trump as a person and on Trump as a politician. And that's what she's about to get into right now. I think she has a really unique perspective on it.
You've made no secret of the fact that you prefer one candidate over the other. Do you think that would have been true for atheists, Ayaan, as well?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I don't even see this election as a contest between Republicans and Democrats. I see it as a contest between people within the Democratic Party. So we have two major parties in the US. One of them is the Republican Party, one of them is the Democratic Party. And within the Democratic Party, this force of far leftist lunatics have completely hijacked the party, and they have, for whatever reason, they seem to have cowed the moderates. And when I talk about moderates, I'm thinking of, the Bill Clinton types of, the proposition that center-left, which is, sure, we need a little bit of government in more things to mitigate for the things that people are not doing themselves economically and for the weak and so on. But, we need a sensible border policy. We need to balance the budget. We need for our schools to be good Democrats who are moderate, who are completely committed to upholding the American Constitution. These moderate Democrats have been cowed, and this far left group have come in with ideas that are revolutionary, that they couldn't win up until 1989. Marxism was something people believed in, and then it collapsed. But that was the economic argument. And now they have these cultural arguments with identity politics, racializing everything, bringing in gender fluidity and other crazy ideas, maiming children, literally removing healthy body parts from children. And that's then across the board in blue states, developing these laws that make it possible and legal to do something like that. I live in the state of California. It's just madness. And there is the moderates just within the Democratic Party don't seem to be able to push these people back into the fringe. And so atheist me would have seen the exact same things and been angry at the exact same things and said, what we need, this party is hijacked, it's subverted, and we need to push back against these people. It's not coming from within the Democratic Party. So naturally speaking, the way we have our system, you have the other party, the Republican Party, and now you see this realignment. So rational Democrats are fleeing. So it's the blue-collar workers in 2016, all the way to Silicon Valley. The tech brothers are now going for Republicans. So there's this complete realignment of what used to be the Republican Party somewhere in between. Either they remain Republican or they are independents, or some of them have moved over to the Democratic Party. But generally speaking, it's a huge number of frustrated constituents of the Democratic Party who are going that way. And that's what we're seeing. And I think that's a good thing. I think the Democratic Party should lose, and they should lose big, and they should have a showdown amongst themselves and hopefully save the party and kick these people out.
Yeah.
From the blue-collar workers in 2016 to the technology brothers currently. Love that. Ayaan is saying something here that I have been saying also for a while, as have many others. The Democratic Party as it currently exists is getting eaten alive by its radical fringe. The moderate majority has been unable to subdue this force within the Democratic Party, and it has mutated the entire Democratic Party into something that is dangerous and not fit to lead. That is what Ayaan is saying here, and I agree with that.
I mean, I'm intrigued to know what you think of Donald Trump as more than just a response to and punishment of the Democratic Party. We've just been talking about humility.
Yeah.
We've been talking about subtlety, not speaking on things that we don't know about and leaving it to the experts. These are not the kind of values which I see embodied in a man like Donald Trump. And so when you come out in fervent support of a political candidate like him, married to everything that you've told me so far in this podcast, is there something about Trump that you like, or is it really just an attempt to punish the Democrats?
So I know Donald Trump just like you from publicity. I haven't met him, but the way he was portrayed in 2016, in the lead up to 2016, by the media, led me to vote for Hillary Clinton, even though I saw some of the problems. But I thought, no, I can't trust this man. First of all, he's never been in politics, but everything that was said about him just meant it was scary. And then he came into government and he governed. And his administration, up until 2019, before the pandemic hit, the policies were just fine. I'm hugely impressed by something like the Abraham Accords, hugely impressed by the way the economy was humming along. Yeah, he was holding a sideshow where he was saying things that were, sometimes entertaining, sometimes crazy, and sometimes I think also designed to provoke the media and the left. but keep himself, draw all attention to himself. And, I wish he spoke like King Charles all the time, but that's not Donald Trump. That's not him, and now we're used to the fact that he doesn't do that. But what you then saw, what alarmed me more than whatever was coming out of his mouth, was what the other side was actually doing. And that was to give themselves, to cast him as this villain, calling him Hitler and demonic stuff, and then giving themselves permission to use the system, weaponize the courts, the justice system, the media even, to do all the things that we all abhor and find undemocratic. And so I really blame the other side and say, if it is upholding the Constitution, his actions are consistent with upholding the Constitution. He's campaigning on let's bring back common sense. He's campaigning on making America great again, on with Elon Musk bringing down the costs, this runaway cost. All this mischief is possible because it's paid for with taxpayer money without accountability. And he's saying, I'm going to bring accountability back. I think given what we have seen in the last 4 years, I'm very much betting on him and his team. And his team is superior. I mean, I look at J.D. Vance, I look at Elon Musk, I look at some of the other people who are supporting him, and I think I would rather bet on this ticket to bring us back to what America is about, rather than this ticket of Kamala Harris. She can't say what she stands for. She did previously, and then she's confronted with it. She flip-flops, and now she's in this state of I won't tell you. And I grew up in a middle class family. Word salad this and word salad that, and that's not going to cut it because politics, elections have consequences. In the last 16 years, 12 of the last 16 years were Democrat. 8 years of Obama, followed by 4 years, Trump, and then 4 years of Biden and Harris. And this surge to the far left is just strong. It is the wearing or the hollowing out of the national identity and more investing in global issues and globalizing America. And that just won't work because that waters down the Constitution to something unrecognizable.
Some of those things that Donald Trump wants to do, one of the most important is immigration. Immigration policy is a top issue for many voters. It sounds very important to you, and you mentioned a moment ago about sensible immigration policies. The idea of stricter immigration is, I know, something that you're in favor of. I'm interested in how you square that with the Christian message that you've come to believe in. When you read passages about Jesus being essentially universal in his love, non-picky, himself born in an unknown land, himself a foreigner, himself an outsider, somebody who teaches you that the Samaritan is your brother because he's the one that looked after you, not because he's part of your nation or your tribe. Reading those stories, I find it very difficult to square the idea of Christian nationalism, the idea of being a Christian and yet believing that there should be a choice that's made about who we sort of give our resources to, who we allow into the country, who we don't. Now, I think it's very sensible to do that too, but maybe that's part of the reason why I'm not a Christian. But I wonder how you put those two together.
I think one thing that Jesus Christ would oppose would be the commodification of the human being. And what we are now calling immigration is not immigration. It's deceiving poor people in poor countries into thinking that they're going to rich countries where they're welcome and they're going to have jobs and they're going to have shelter and healthcare and that they can send money back to. And that's not what happens. What happens is the people who are deceived to sell whatever they have and raise whatever little money that they can, give that money to smugglers, people smugglers, and that are then exploited and taken advantage of. There's a reason why almost 75% of the people who make it through these borders are male, because women and children, by the way, find themselves just in greater suffering than where they came from. You're scooping away the middle classes of these poorer countries, and their money is going to smugglers, and then they are exploited. They're raped. They're used in prostitution syndicates. They come out cheated, and then they come to societies where they're left with no identity. They are told, you can't work here, you're not welcome here. They meet with various forms of rejection. I'm not going to use the word racism because it's been overused, but I'm sure that there's also some racism. And so it would be, Jesus would be against any form of dishonesty. And I think what we are seeing now is this cabal of moving human beings from one side to the other. And I just think that's not going to work in the host societies. It's causing a lot, the breakdown of social cohesion. You're British. Look at what this, I call it mindless migration, has done to Britain, but also France, the Netherlands, Germany. There's a great deal of turmoil caused in the host societies. And so I think that, to be very honest, we can have immigration systems that are a win-win, that work for the immigrant and that work for the host society. But it's not what we have now. What we have now is an abuse of the asylum system. There are large numbers of people who think that by coming to the West, they're going to have they'll have jobs and better incomes. These are people seeking to improve their economic well-being, but they're only using the asylum system. So I would say the first proposal I would make is for Western countries to withdraw from the Geneva Convention and just shut down the asylum systems and then develop their own national asylum laws so that they can choose who they want to take as asylum seekers, which would always be a really tiny number, and then develop an economic immigration policy that, again, is a win-win for the people who are coming and the people who are here.
A final question for you. I asked you earlier what you might have said to Christopher Hitchens, if you could go back in time or bring him here today. I've asked you what you would say to my atheist listeners or to other Christians. Just on a personal level, if you could go back in time and speak to atheist Ayaan, what would Christian Ayaan say to atheist Ayaan 10 years ago?
Christianity is radically different from Islam. Christianity is unique. Everything I love and care about Western society and Western civilization is a product of Christianity. And I would have then said to Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, all of my atheist friends, how do you square this? Why would you be throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Is there nothing you want to retain?
The baby out with the holy water.
With the holy water, yeah. And I think I would have also I would have paid more attention to the Christian apologists at the time who were debating all of these things. And, I owe them a huge apology. And I think a lot of us owe them a huge apology.
Well, Ayaan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. As you say, this is a work in progress, and there'll be a book at some point when it's ready, detailing more of what brought you to faith. But I appreciate that it's still somewhat up in the air. You're still learning, and so I appreciate all the more that you're.
Yeah, I hope I'll bring sort of more concise answers and more well thought through answers than at this stage of discovery where I am in now.
Christianity, just right there at the end. Christianity is radically different than Islam. Christianity is unique. Everything that she loves about and cares about in Western society and Western civilization is the product of Christianity. And then she would just pose the question to her famous atheist friends from years ago, how do you square this? So I hope that this discussion was as impactful for you as it was for me. If you were really into this, if this really, hit you deeply the way it did for me, I would just invite you to go back and listen to the entire conversation again without my commentary. And there's a link to the original video below in the description. And just listen to that on its own again, and then come back and listen to this episode again. I think it's worth it. I really think it's that enlightening. You have to respect Ayaan's perspective. When she speaks on the differences between Islam and Christianity, when she speaks on a wrathful God versus a loving God, when she speaks on the healing, abundant love of Jesus Christ, when she speaks on Jesus working better than therapy, when she speaks on the dangers of wokeism, when she speaks on the need for a sensible border policy, when she speaks on the dangers and the evils of illegal immigration from the perspective of the immigrant, when she speaks on all of these topics, she is speaking from a unique perspective, a knowledgeable perspective. And it's knowledgeable to a degree that very few of us are, because very few of us have lived the life that Ayaan has lived. And so I just think that she's really worth listening to. And I hope you were able to appreciate the quality of Alex as a host there. I thought his questions were fantastic. And both of them, Ayaan and Alex, they both have a wealth of content available online for free, and it's well worth your time to dig more into. Okay, that's it. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe. If you're looking for the blog, it's in the description. If you're looking for the online community, it's coming soon. If you know somebody that would be interested in Things Hidden, send this to them. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you the best.